While I grieved our stillborn child, my husband celebrated his mistress's son. Now he regrets it. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor buzzed above me like angry wasps, their harsh glare making the white tiles beneath my knees seem impossibly bright. My hospital gown was still damp with sweat, and the emptiness in my arms felt heavier than any child could have been. I pressed my forehead against the cold floor, trying to ground myself in something. Anything that might make this nightmare feel less real, but it was real. All of it. The silence in the delivery room where there should have been crying, the pitying looks from the nurses, the way Dr. Matthews had squeezed my shoulder before walking away, leaving me alone with words no mother should ever have to hear. I'm so sorry, but there was nothing we could do. My son. My beautiful, perfect son, who would never take his first breath. I don't know how long I stayed there, collapsed in that sterile hallway. Time had lost all meaning. The world had shrunk to the space between my heartbeats, each one a reminder that I was still alive while my baby wasn't. The thought made me want to tear my own heart out. Anything to stop feeling this raw, endless pain. That's when I heard it. Laughter. Rich, deep, familiar laughter that had once made me feel safe and loved. Now it cut through me like a blade of ice. Marcus. I lifted my head, my body protesting every movement. The laughter came again, floating down from somewhere above me. Before I knew what I was doing, I was pulling myself up, using the wall for support. My legs shook, but determination drove me forward. One step, another, each one bringing me closer to that sound that couldn't be what I thought it was. The maternity ward was on the floor above. I knew this because Marcus and I had toured it months ago, his hand warm on my lower back as we imagined our future. Now I dragged myself up the stairs, my hospital bracelet catching the light with each movement. The laughter grew louder, punctuated by voices I couldn't quite make out. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw him through the glass doors of the maternity ward's waiting area. Marcus, my husband of 5 years, was standing in a small crowd of people. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his blue dress shirt crisp and unwrinkled, not like a man who had spent hours supporting his wife through labor. Because he hadn't been there. He'd been here. A bottle of champagne was in his hands, the cork already popped, foam spilling over his fingers as people held out plastic cups. His smile was radiant, broader than I'd ever seen it. That smile had once been my son. Now it was a knife in my gut. "It's a boy," he announced, his voice carrying through the glass. 7 pounds, 8 ounces of pure perfection. The small crowd cheered, and that's when I saw her. Victoria Chen, Marcus's junior partner at the law firm. She was in a hospital bed that had been wheeled out to join the celebration, her long black hair falling in perfect waves around her shoulders, her makeup flawless despite having just given birth. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blue. My knees gave out again, but this time I caught myself against the wall. The world tilted and spun, but I couldn't look away. Victoria looked up at Marcus with such adoration as he bent down to kiss first her forehead, then the baby's. Our colleagues from the firm were there, patting Marcus on the back, cooing over the baby. Everyone was smiling, laughing, celebrating. While 2 floors below, my baby lay cold and still. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't answered any of my calls during labor, not because he was in court, as his texts had claimed, but because he was here. While I screamed and pushed and prayed, while our son's heart stopped beating, while my world ended, he was here, waiting for another woman to give him the family we had dreamed of together. Something shifted inside me then. Something fundamental and irreversible. The grief that had been threatening to drown me crystallized into something harder, colder. I watched through the glass as Marcus poured more champagne, as he played the proud father, as he lived the life that should have been ours. And in that moment, I made a promise, not just to myself, but to my son, who would never draw breath. Marcus had built his life on lies, climbing higher and higher on the ladder of success. He thought he was untouchable now, with his corner office and his perfect new family. But he'd forgotten something crucial. I had been there for every step of that climb. I knew exactly which rungs were weak, which foundations would crumble with the right pressure. I placed my hand against the glass, leaving a smeared handprint, evidence of my presence that would soon be wiped away, just as Marcus had tried to wipe away our life together. But I wouldn't disappear so easily. I wouldn't be the sad story people whispered about at office parties, the cautionary tale of a woman who lost everything. No, I would be much more than that. I turned away from the scene of celebration, my bare feet silent on the hospital floor. Each step back to my room was a step toward my new purpose. Marcus thought today marked the beginning of his perfect new life. He was wrong. Today marked the beginning of his end. And I would be there to watch him fall, piece by piece, until he felt every ounce of the pain he'd inflicted on me, until he understood what it meant to lose everything that mattered, until he learned that some betrayals can never be forgiven, only avenged. 3 days after my world shattered, I stood in what used to be our bedroom, Marcus's cologne still, lingering in the air like a ghost. He hadn't come home since that day at the hospital. No calls, no messages, just divorce papers delivered by a courier, as if 5 years of marriage could be erased with a signature. The papers lay unopened on the kitchen counter. I wasn't ready to touch them yet. Instead, I methodically went through his closet, my hands running over the expensive suits he loved so much. Each one told a story. The charcoal gray Armani he wore when he made partner, the navy Tom Ford from our anniversary dinner last year, the black Hugo Boss from the day we first met. I pulled them out one by one, laying them on the bed we once shared. The same bed where we'd planned our future, where we'd whispered about names for our baby in the dark. James, we'd decided. James Marcus Reynolds. A name that would never be called at graduation, never be written on a birthday cake, never be spoken in anything but grief-laden whispers. My hands trembled as I reached for the highest shelf, where I knew he kept his most precious possessions. The vintage Rolex his grandfather left him. The fountain pen collection he'd been building since law school. The small leather box containing his Harvard Law School ring. These weren't just accessories to Marcus. They were symbols of his carefully constructed identity. Behind these treasures, I found what I was looking for. A small black ledger. Marcus was meticulous about keeping physical records, a habit he'd developed from his mentor at the firm. Digital trails can be traced, he'd told me once, but paper can burn. I sat on the floor, my back against the bed, and opened the ledger. Inside were names, dates, numbers, all written in Marcus's precise handwriting. To anyone else, it might have looked like innocent business records. But I knew better. I'd been his confidant, his partner, his alibi. I knew exactly what these entries meant: clients whose trust funds had been reallocated, settlements that had been inflated, witnesses whose silence had been bought. Marcus had always justified it as necessary evil in service of the greater good. Sometimes you have to bend the rules to help people, he'd say, and I'd believed him. Or maybe I'd just wanted to believe him. Love has a way of blinding us to the darkness in others. A sudden noise downstairs made me freeze. Keys in the lock, the familiar squeak of the front door, heavy footsteps on hardwood. Claire? Marcus's voice carried up the stairs. Your car's outside. I know you're here. I quickly slid the ledger into my bag and stood up. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. This was the first time I'd see him since the hospital, and I refused to let him see me broken. The bedroom door opened, and there he stood. He'd lost weight. Not much, but enough that I noticed. The circles under his eyes suggested sleepless nights, but his clothes were immaculate as always. Our gazes met, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, regret. Whatever it was, it vanished quickly behind his lawyer's mask. "I came to get some things," he said, his eyes moving to the suits laid out on the bed. "I see you've been busy. How is your son?" The words came out before I could stop them, each one dripping with acid. Marcus flinched, a small victory. "Claire, I never meant—" "How long?" I cut him off. "How long were you with her while we were trying for a baby? While we were going to fertility appointments? While I was taking hormones that made me sick every morning?" He took a step forward, then seemed to think better of it. "It's complicated." "No, it's not." I moved closer to him, close enough to smell his cologne. Different now. Something I didn't recognize. "It's actually very simple. You're a coward, Marcus. A coward who couldn't even face me when our baby died." "I couldn't—" he started, then stopped, running a hand through his hair. "The papers are downstairs. My lawyer says we can have this done quickly, quietly. I'll make sure you're taken care of." I laughed then, a sound so hollow it seemed to echo in the room. Taken care of? Like a problem to be solved? You know what I mean. The house, a generous settlement, whatever you want. I just want this to be civil. I picked up one of his suits, the fabric smooth under my fingers. "Civil," I repeated. "Like serving your wife divorce papers while she's still in the hospital? Like celebrating your mistress's baby while your dead son is being taken to the morgue? That's not fair," he said. But I saw the way his shoulders tensed, the way his jaw clenched. "I know you're hurting. You don't know anything about what I'm feeling." I laid the suit back down with exaggerated care. "But you will." Something in my tone made him look at me, really look at me, for the first time since he'd entered the room. I saw the moment he realized that the woman standing before him wasn't the same one he'd married, wasn't the same one he'd betrayed. His expression shifted from guilt to something closer to wariness. "What's that supposed to mean?" I smiled, and I watched him take an involuntary step back. "Good." He should be afraid. "It means I'm not going to make this easy for you, Marcus. It means I'm not going to quietly disappear with your hush money. It means that every time you look at your precious new family, you're going to remember what you did to get them. Claire, get out." My voice was soft but firm. "Take your suits, take your things, and get out. Your lawyer can talk to mine about the rest." He stood there for a moment longer, mouth half open as if to argue. But something in my expression must have convinced him it would be pointless. Without another word, he gathered an armful of suits and left, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. I waited until I heard the front door close, until his car started and the sound of the engine faded away. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized years ago. "Stephen? It's Claire Reynolds." I paused, listening to his surprised greeting. Stephen had been Marcus's mentor at the firm before retiring, and the only partner who'd voted against making Marcus head of litigation. "I need to talk to you about Marcus, about everything." As I spoke, I touched the ledger in my bag. Marcus had taught me well. Paper could burn, but secrets could destroy. Stephen Chase's house sat perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, a glass and steel monument to 50 years of legal victories. As I pulled into his circular driveway, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark circles under my eyes, skin still pale from the hospital, but my gaze was sharp, focused. I barely recognized myself. The housekeeper who answered the door led me through rooms filled with modern art and ancient law books to Stephen's study. He stood as I entered, and I saw the shock register on his face before he could hide it. The last time he'd seen me had been at the firm's Christmas party, when I was 5 months pregnant and glowing with hope. "Claire," he said, coming around, his desk. He moved to hug me, then stopped, uncertain. I heard about what happened. About everything. I'm so sorry." The sympathy in his voice threatened to crack my composure. I'd chosen a black pantsuit for this meeting, armor against the world. But suddenly I felt as fragile as glass. I swallowed hard and forced myself to focus on why I was here. "Thank you for seeing me," I said, taking the seat he offered. "I know it was short notice." Stephen settled back behind his desk, his silver hair catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. "For you? Always. Though I must admit, I was surprised to hear from you, especially given the circumstances." I reached into my bag and pulled out the ledger, placing it on his desk without a word. Stephen's eyes narrowed as he recognized it. His hand, when he reached for it, trembled slightly. "Where did you get this?" he asked, though I suspected he knew. "Marcus's closet, behind his grandfather's Rolex and his Harvard ring." I leaned forward. "Tell me, Stephen, did you know what he was doing with the Morrison Trust, with the Pacheco settlement, with all of them?" He opened the ledger, flipping through pages with practiced ease. Each turn seemed to age him further. "I had suspicions," he said finally. "But suspicions aren't proof." And by the time I started looking closer, Marcus had already secured his position as head of litigation. "With Victoria's help," I added. The name tasted bitter on my tongue. Stephen's head snapped up. "You know about that too?" "I know everything." I pulled out a USB drive and set it next to the ledger. Every email, every transaction, every creative accounting solution they came up with together. I was his wife, Stephen. He talked in his sleep. That wasn't entirely true. Marcus had never talked in his sleep, but he had talked to me. Late at night, after a few drinks, proud of his clever solutions to impossible cases. I'd been his confessor, his conscience, or so I'd thought. Stephen picked up the USB drive, turning it over in his hands. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you were right about him. 3 years ago, when you voted against making him head of litigation, you said he was dangerous, that his ambition would eventually outweigh his ethics." I met his gaze steadily. "You were the only one who saw him clearly, and now you want what? Revenge?" There was no judgment in his tone, only curiosity. "I want justice." The word felt right on my tongue. Not just for me or for my son, but for everyone he's hurt. Everyone whose trust he betrayed. Stephen was quiet for a long moment, studying me. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away the seconds, its rhythm matching my heartbeat. "You understand what you're proposing?" he finally asked. "If we use this information, it won't just hurt Marcus. It could bring down half the firm. People will lose their jobs. Careers will be destroyed." Like my life was destroyed? I stood up, walking to the window. Below, waves crashed against the cliffs in an endless rhythm. "You know what he was doing when our son died? He was popping champagne in the maternity ward, celebrating his new baby with Victoria. The baby they conceived while I was going through IVF treatments, while I was losing pregnancy after pregnancy." My voice broke, and I took a moment to steady myself before turning back to Stephen. He doesn't deserve to keep everything he built on lies. None of them do. Stephen stood, walking over to join me at the window. He was shorter than I remembered, or maybe I was standing taller these days. "What exactly do you have in mind?" I smiled, the expression feeling foreign on my face. "First, we need to talk to Judge Harriet Chen." "Victoria's mother?" Stephen's eyebrows shot up. "You think she'll help us?" "I think she deserves to know exactly what kind of man her daughter married." I pulled out another document from my bag, a printout of an email chain between Marcus and Victoria, dating back 2 years. And I think she'll be very interested to learn how they really won the Callahan case. Stephen took the printout, his eyes widening as he read. Claire, this is witness tampering. If this gets out, everything gets out, I finished, for him. That's the point. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You've thought this through. I've had nothing but time to think. I touched the ledger on his desk. Marcus taught me well. Every good lawyer knows you have to build your case piece by piece. Evidence, witnesses, timing. And Judge Chen is your first piece? She's my opening statement. I sat back down, crossing my legs. Once she understands what her daughter and son-in-law have done, she'll have a choice to make. And Harriet Chen didn't get where she is by protecting criminals, even when they're family. Stephen returned to his desk, pressing a button on his phone. Angela, hold my calls for the rest of the day. He looked up at me. Tell me everything. Every detail. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. For the next 3 hours, I laid out my plan. Every step, every contingency, every potential reaction. Stephen listened, occasionally taking notes, sometimes offering refinements. As the sun set over the Pacific, casting long shadows across his study, we built the framework of Marcus's destruction. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, about consequences, about making sure that men like Marcus couldn't simply take what they wanted and walk away unscathed. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt since that day in the hospital. Purpose. Marcus had taught me how to think like a lawyer, how to find weaknesses and exploit them. Now I would use those lessons to dismantle everything he held dear. My son would never see justice. But I would make sure his father paid for every single lie, every betrayal, every moment of pain he'd caused. And when it was over, when Marcus finally understood the true cost of his choices, I would make sure he knew exactly why his world had crumbled. Because sometimes, justice wears a black suit and carries a ledger full of secrets. Judge Harriet Chen's chambers felt like stepping into another century. Dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books, and a massive mahogany desk that had probably witnessed thousands of life-altering decisions. The woman herself sat behind it, every bit as imposing as her surroundings, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. Mrs. Reynolds, she said, her voice clipped and professional. I must admit, I was surprised by your request for a meeting. Her eyes flicked to the clock on the wall. 7:30 a.m., early enough that her staff wouldn't be in yet. Thank you for seeing me, Your Honor. I sat in one of the leather chairs facing her desk, my back straight, the folder in my lap feeling as heavy as lead. I know your time is valuable. Indeed. She folded her hands on her desk. I assume this is about the divorce? While I sympathize with your situation, I hope you understand that I cannot be involved in any proceedings involving my daughter's husband. This isn't about the divorce. I opened the folder and removed a single photograph, placing it on her desk. This is about the Callahan case. The change in her expression was subtle, a slight tightening around the eyes, a barely perceptible tension in her shoulders. The photograph showed Marcus and Victoria leaving a motel on the outskirts of town, dated 3 days before the key witness in the Callahan case suddenly changed their testimony. What exactly are you implying, Mrs. Reynolds? I placed the email, printouts next to the photograph. I'm not implying anything, Your Honor. I'm showing you proof that your daughter and my husband bribed a witness to perjure themselves, a case over which you presided. Judge Chen picked up the emails, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. I watched as she read, her face growing progressively paler. When she looked up, her hands were shaking slightly. Where did you get these? Marcus was careless. He thought I was too busy trying to get pregnant to notice what he was doing. I leaned forward. But that's not all. The Morrison Trust, the Pacheco settlement, the Wheeler bankruptcy. They've been manipulating cases for years. Together. She stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the courthouse steps. Morning sunshine streamed in, catching the silver in her hair like a crown. Why are you showing me this? Because you deserve to know the truth. About all of it. I pulled out Marcus's ledger. And because you're the only person with enough power to make this right. She turned back to me, her expression unreadable. You want me to help you destroy my daughter's marriage, her career? I want you to do what you've always done, Your Honor. Uphold the law. I stood, moving to join her at the window. Below, lawyers and clients were beginning to arrive for the day's proceedings. Victoria made her choices. She chose to help Marcus break the law. She chose to have an affair with a married man. She chose to build her happiness on the ruins of mine. She's my daughter. The words were barely a whisper. And she's about to destroy everything you've spent your life building. I turned to face her. When this comes out, and it will come out, what do you think will happen? Every case they touched will be reviewed, every decision questioned, including yours. Judge Chen's head snapped up, her eyes sharp. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. Marcus and Victoria left a trail. Stephen Chase has already begun gathering evidence. If you don't act now, if you don't help us handle this properly, the scandal will take down everyone it touches, including you. She walked back to her desk, picking up the ledger with trembling hands. As she flipped through it, I saw the moment realization hit her, the moment she understood just how deep the corruption went. Victoria's baby, she said, suddenly looking up at me. Does she know about your son? The question hit me like a physical blow. I forced myself to breathe through the pain. She knew I was pregnant. She knew we'd been trying for years. She knew everything, Your Honor. And she did it anyway. Judge Chen sank into her chair, suddenly looking every one of her 65 years. What do you want from me? I want you to call a meeting. Today. You, me, Stephen Chase, Marcus, and Victoria. In your chambers. I handed her one final document, a typed confession detailing every illegal act I knew about. And I want you to give them a choice. She scanned the confession, her judicial mask cracking further with each line. What kind of choice? They can sign this confession, resign from the firm, and face the consequences of their actions privately, or, I let the words hang in the air, or you'll take everything public. She set the confession down carefully, as if it might explode. You do understand what you're asking. This would destroy them, their careers, their reputations, everything. Like they destroyed me? I moved toward the door, then paused. The meeting needs to be today, Your Honor, before they have time to hide evidence or coordinate stories. I'll be in Stephen's office until noon. I was almost to the door when her voice stopped me. Mrs. Reynolds. I turned back. Judge Chen was standing again, her posture rigid. You were there, at Victoria's baby shower. I remember you brought a gift. A silver rattle, I said, the memory burning in my throat. Custom made. I didn't know then, of course. About any of it. She nodded slowly. I'll make the calls. 2:00. Don't be late. As I walked out of her chambers, my heels clicking on the marble floors, I felt a strange mix of triumph and sorrow. In a few hours, I would face Marcus and Victoria together for the first time since the hospital. I would watch as their carefully constructed world began to crumble. But first, I had one more stop to make. One more piece to put in place before the trap could spring shut. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized years ago. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Hello? Richard, it's Claire Reynolds. Remember that favor you owe Marcus? It's time to collect. The game was changing. By sunset, Marcus would learn that every friend he thought he could count on, every ally he'd cultivated, every secret he thought was safe, all of it could be turned against him. Just like he'd turned my love against me. At exactly 2:00, I sat in Judge Chen's chambers, positioned so I could watch the door. Stephen Chase sat beside me, his presence steady and reassuring. The judge herself stood by the window, her back rigid, hands clasped behind her. The door opened. Marcus entered first, his confident stride faltering when he saw me. Victoria followed, looking immaculate in a navy dress that couldn't quite hide her post-pregnancy figure. She carried a designer diaper bag along with her briefcase. No baby. She'd been too smart for that. Mother? Victoria's voice held a note of confusion. What's going on? Why is she here? Judge Chen didn't turn from the window. Sit down, Victoria. The command in her voice was unmistakable. Both Marcus and Victoria sat, though I noticed they chose chairs slightly apart from each other. Interesting. The first crack in their united front, perhaps. Your Honor, Marcus started, slipping into his courtroom voice. If this is about the divorce proceedings, show them. Judge Chen cut him off, finally turning to face the room. Her eyes met mine, and I saw the cost of this moment written in the lines of her face. I opened my briefcase and removed the ledger, placing it on the judge's desk. Marcus's face went pale. Where did you... He began, then stopped himself. But I saw his hand twitch toward his coat pocket, where he habitually kept his phone. Looking for this? I pulled out his phone, the real one, not the one he used for everyday calls. Amazing what you can find in a false bottom drawer. All those conversations with witnesses who suddenly changed their testimony. All those offshore account numbers. All those messages between you and Victoria, going back 3 years. Victoria's composure cracked. Mother, I can explain. Can you? Judge Chen's voice could have frozen fire. Can you explain the Callahan case? The Morrison Trust? Can you explain why you helped your lover bribe witnesses while his wife was undergoing fertility treatments? The color drained from Victoria's face. How did you... I knew everything, I interrupted, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. Every late night at the office, every business trip that wasn't about business. I knew you were sleeping with my husband, Victoria. I just didn't know you were helping him break the law, too. Marcus leaned forward, his lawyers, mask firmly in place. Whatever you think you have, Claire, it won't hold up. You're emotional, grieving. Don't. The word came out like a whip crack. Don't you dare try to dismiss me as emotional, not after what you did. Stephen cleared his throat. I've already verified everything, Marcus. The witness tampering, the embezzlement, the falsified evidence, all of it. You two weren't as careful as you thought. We have a choice for you, I continued, pulling out 2 copies of the confession. You can sign these, admit what you've done, and face the consequences privately. Resign from the firm, return the stolen money, accept whatever sanctions the Bar Association deems appropriate. Or, Victoria's voice was barely a whisper, or by this time tomorrow, every document, every recording, every piece of evidence goes to the Ethics Committee, the DA's office, and the press. I met her eyes. Your choice. Marcus stood up so abruptly his chair scraped against the floor. This is blackmail. No, Judge Chen spoke, her voice heavy with authority. This is mercy, more than either of you deserve. Victoria turned to her mother, tears welling in her eyes. Mom, please. You brought this on yourself. Judge Chen's words were sharp enough to draw blood. You chose this path. Now choose how it ends. Marcus paced the small room like a caged animal. You can't prove anything. It's your word against... Richard Morrison called me this morning, I cut in. His head snapped toward me. Remember that favor you held over him? Turns out he'd rather confess to the original fraud than go down with you. He's speaking to the DA right now. The blood drained from Marcus's face. You're bluffing. I pulled out my phone, pressed play. Richard's voice filled the room. I'll tell them everything. Marcus, about the fake documents, the offshore accounts, all of it. I'm sorry, but I have to protect myself. The recording ended. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria broke first. She reached for one of the confessions with trembling hands. What happens to my baby if this goes public? The question hit me like a physical blow. My hand instinctively went to my still tender abdomen, where my own child should have been growing. But when I spoke, my voice was calm. Sign the confession, and your son never has to know what his parents did. He gets to grow up believing in you. I met her eyes. That's more than my son will ever get. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. Without another word, she picked up a pen and signed. Marcus watched her with disbelief. Victoria, don't... It's over, Marcus. She wouldn't look at him. We lost. He stood there for a long moment, looking between the confession and me. I saw the exact moment he realized he had no moves left. When he finally sat down to sign, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. I hope it was worth it, I said softly as he finished signing. Your new family, your perfect life. Was it worth destroying everything we built together? He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Claire, I never meant to get caught. I gathered the signed confessions, my movements deliberate. No one ever does. Judge Chen cleared her throat. You'll both submit your resignations to the firm by tomorrow morning. You'll cooperate with the Bar Association's investigation, and you will never practice law in this state again. She turned to her daughter. Victoria, I expect you home for dinner tonight. We have much to discuss. As Marcus and Victoria left the room, heads bowed in defeat, I remained seated. The victory I'd imagined didn't feel like triumph. It felt hollow, empty, like everything else since that day in the hospital. Are you all right? Stephen asked quietly. I thought about my son, about the life we should have had, about all the moments that would never be. No, I answered honestly, but I will be. Judge Chen approached me, her judicial mask finally cracking. What you did today, it took courage and mercy. She paused. I'm sorry about your son. The words hit me harder than I expected. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not yet. Thank you, Your Honor. I stood, gathering my things. Stephen will handle the rest of the arrangements. As I walked out of her chambers, I felt lighter somehow. Not healed. I didn't think I'd ever fully heal from what I'd lost. But stronger. Marcus had taken my future, my trust, my chance at motherhood. But he hadn't taken my power. He hadn't taken my ability to fight back. In the end, that would have to be enough. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the remains of what used to be our life together. A half-empty bottle of red wine stood on the counter, the same vintage Marcus and I had shared the night we decided to start trying for a baby. Back then, we'd talked about names, about nursery colors, about all the possibilities that stretched ahead of us like an endless horizon. Now all those dreams lay shattered around me like broken glass. My phone buzzed for the 20th time that evening. The news of Marcus and Victoria's resignations had spread through the legal community like wildfire. Everyone wanted to know why. Everyone had theories. Everyone wanted to talk to the grieving widow who'd lost everything. I ignored the call, just as I'd ignored all the others. Instead, I pulled out the small memory box I'd been avoiding since coming home from the hospital. Inside were the ultrasound pictures, the tiny blue booties I'd bought the day we found out it was a boy, the journal where I'd documented every moment of my pregnancy. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Not the violent sobs of that day, in the hospital, but something quieter, deeper. Grief for my son, for the mother I'd never get to be, for the woman I used to be, the one who believed in love and trust and happy endings. A knock at the door startled me from my reverie. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something compelled me to answer. Through the peephole, I saw Sarah Martinez, my neighbor from across the street. The one who'd brought me meals during my difficult pregnancies, who'd held my hand through each loss before this final, devastating one. I opened the door. "I brought lasagna," she said simply, holding up a casserole dish. "And I thought you might need a friend." The kindness in her voice nearly undid me. I stepped aside to let her in, watching as she moved through my kitchen with familiar ease, pulling out plates and forks as if it were any other evening. "I heard about Marcus," she said finally, setting a plate in front of me. "About everything." I picked up my fork, pushing the food around without eating. News travels fast. In this neighborhood, lightning's jealous. She sat across from me, her dark eyes gentle but direct. "You want to talk about it?" "I destroyed him today." The words came out before I could stop them. Him and Victoria both. Their careers, their reputations, everything they built. Sarah took a sip of wine, considering. "Good." The simple response startled a laugh out of me. The first real laugh since the hospital. "You don't think it was too much? Too vindictive?" "Honey, that man watched you go through hell trying to have his baby. He watched you inject yourself with hormones, cry over negative tests, grieve over losses. And the whole time, he was building a family with someone else." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "He deserved everything he got." "I thought it would feel different," I admitted. "Getting justice. I thought it would fill this hole inside me." "Nothing will fill that hole, Claire. Not revenge, not justice, not time." She spoke with the wisdom of someone who knew. I remembered suddenly that she'd lost a child too, years ago. "But you learned to live with it. You learned to carry it." We sat in companionable silence for a while, the lasagna growing cold between us. Outside, I could hear children playing, their laughter floating through the evening air like dandelion seeds. "I need to sell the house," I said suddenly, the realization hitting me with unexpected clarity. I can't stay here. Not with all these memories." Sarah nodded as if she'd been expecting this. "My sister's a realtor. She'll help you get a fair price. No questions asked." "I don't even know where I'll go." The thought should have terrified me, but instead, it felt like taking a deep breath after being underwater too long. "You'll figure it out." She started, gathering the dishes, her movements unhurried. "You're stronger than you think, Claire. You always have been." After she left, I wandered through the house, really seeing it for the first time since everything happened. The nursery we'd painted soft blue, still waiting for its occupant. The living room where Marcus and I had spent countless evenings planning our future. The bedroom where we'd made love, made promises, made plans. Every room held echoes of what should have been. But maybe Sarah was right. Maybe I was stronger than I thought. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. At the top, I typed, "New beginnings." Then, slowly at first, but with growing certainty, I began to list everything I needed to do: sell the house, find a new place to live, maybe even leave the state entirely, transfer my part of the legal settlement to a charitable foundation for bereaved mothers. I didn't want Marcus's money. As I worked, I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, a weight I knew I'd carry forever. But alongside it, something else was growing. Not hope exactly. It was too soon for that. But possibility. The chance for something new, something undefined, something that was entirely my own. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Stephen. "The paperwork's filed," he said when I answered. "It's done." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "For everything." "Claire." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What you did today, taking them down legally, giving them a chance to resign instead of facing public humiliation, that showed remarkable restraint. And humanity." I thought about Victoria's face when she signed the confession. About the baby, who would never know what his parents had done. Maybe I'm just tired of destruction. "Have you thought about what's next?" I looked at my laptop screen, at the list I'd been making. "I'm working on it." After we hung up, I went to the nursery one last time. In the soft evening light, it looked peaceful, waiting. I touched the crib we'd chosen together, ran my fingers over the soft blankets that would never warm my son. "I love you," I whispered to the empty room. "I'll always love you." Then I closed the door, knowing I wouldn't open it again. Tomorrow, I would call Sarah's sister about selling the house. Tomorrow, I would start packing up the life I'd built here. Tomorrow, I would begin the long, hard work of becoming whoever I was going to be now. But tonight, I let myself feel everything. The grief, the anger, the loss, and yes, even the small, tender shoot of something that might one day grow into hope. After all, I was my son's mother, and mothers, even those whose children live only in their hearts, never stop fighting. Never stop loving. Never stop living. It wasn't an ending. Not really. It was a beginning. 2 weeks after Marcus and Victoria's resignations, I stood in the middle of what used to be my living room, surrounded by moving boxes and the steady stream of morning light through the windows. Sarah's sister Lisa had already found a buyer for the house, a young couple expecting their first child. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was labeling another box when my phone rang. Judge Chen's name flashed on the screen. "Mrs. Reynolds." Her voice was formal as ever, but there was an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Your Honor." I set down my marker, trying to ignore the sudden tension in my shoulders. "What can I do for you?" "Victoria came to see me yesterday." She paused, and I heard papers shuffling in the background. "She's moving to Chicago with the baby. Her husband, Marcus, he's not taking it well." Something cold settled in my stomach. "I'm not sure why you're telling me this. Because Marcus has been drinking, heavily. He's been making threats, about exposing everything, about taking everyone down with him." Another pause. "He mentioned your name specifically." I sank onto a nearby box, my legs suddenly unsteady. "He signed the confession. If he exposes anything, he'll only implicate himself further." "People aren't always rational when they're desperate, Mrs. Reynolds. I thought you should know." After we hung up, I stood by the window, watching the neighborhood children ride, their bikes in the late morning sun. The warning should have frightened me, but instead, I felt oddly calm. Marcus had already taken everything he could from me. What else could he possibly do? The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. When I opened it, I found myself face to face with Victoria Chen. She looked different. Thinner, paler, with dark circles under her eyes that expensive concealer couldn't quite hide. In her arms was her son, sleeping peacefully against her shoulder. "Can I come in?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. I should have said no, should have closed the door in her face. Instead, I stepped aside. She walked into the half-packed living room, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood floors. The baby stirred but didn't wake. I'm sorry, she said, still not looking at me. I know those words mean nothing, but I'm sorry. For which part? My voice was steadier than I felt. For sleeping with my husband? For helping him break the law? Or for celebrating your son's birth while mine was being taken to the morgue? She flinched. For all of it. For not being strong enough to stop it. For letting Marcus convince me that what we were doing was justified. Why are you here, Victoria? She finally turned to face me, and I saw tears in her eyes. Because I need you to know that I'm going to do better. Be better. For him. She looked down at her son. And because I need to warn you. About Marcus? Your mother already called. It's worse than what she knows. Victoria shifted the baby to her other shoulder. He's not just making threats. He's planning something. I found documents on his laptop, emails to journalists, files about every case we ever worked on. He's going to expose everything, destroy everyone involved, including you. I laughed, the sound harsh in the empty room. I already destroyed myself, Victoria, the day I married him. You don't understand. She stepped closer, her voice urgent. He's twisted everything, made it look like you were involved, like you knew about the illegal activities all along. He's fabricated evidence, forged documents with your signature. The calm I'd felt earlier evaporated. What? He's losing everything. His career, his reputation, his family. He wants everyone else to lose everything too. She reached into her diaper bag and pulled out a USB drive. This is a copy of everything I found on his laptop. Emails, documents, his whole plan. I stared at the drive but didn't take it. Why are you helping me? Victoria looked down at her son again, touching his soft dark hair. Because someday, he's going to ask me about his father. About the kind of person I was. And I want to be able to tell him that when I finally understood what I'd done wrong, I tried to make it right. The baby chose that moment to wake up, his small face scrunching before his eyes opened. They were dark, like his mother's, but something in his innocent gaze made my heart clench. What's his name? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Thomas, she said softly. After my father. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Thomas was one of the names Marcus and I had considered for our son. I have to go, Victoria said, placing the USB drive on a nearby box. Our flight leaves in 3 hours. But Claire... She hesitated. Be careful. Marcus isn't the man either of us thought we knew. After she left, I sat among the boxes of my old life, holding the USB drive that contained evidence of how thoroughly Marcus planned to destroy what remained of it. Outside, the sun continued to shine. Children continued to play. Life continued to move forward with relentless indifference to the chaos in my heart. I pulled out my phone and dialed Stephen's number. We have a problem, I said when he answered. And I'm going to need your help one more time. As I explained what Victoria had told me, I realized something important. I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Marcus had already taken my future, my trust, my child. But he couldn't take my strength. Not unless I let him. And I was done letting Marcus take anything from me. The sun was setting by the time I finished talking to Stephen, casting long shadows across the boxes that contained my past. Tomorrow, we would begin working on countering Marcus's plan. Tomorrow, I would face this new threat. But tonight, I had packing to finish. Because whatever Marcus was planning, One thing was certain. I wasn't going to let it stop me from moving forward. From building something new from the ashes of what he'd destroyed. After all, I'd already survived the worst day of my life. Everything else was just another battle to be won. Stephen's home office had become our war room. Papers covered every surface, laptop screens glowed with endless email chains, and coffee cups multiplied like rabbits. We'd been working for 3 days straight, unraveling the web of lies Marcus had woven around me. He's thorough, I'll give him that, Stephen muttered, scrolling through another fabricated email thread. He's created a whole alternate history where you were his willing accomplice in everything. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my tired eyes. He always said I was his best alibi. I just didn't realize he meant it literally. The USB drive Victoria had given me contained hundreds of documents. Backdated emails showing my supposed knowledge of the illegal activities, forged signatures on fraudulent documents, even manufactured photographs showing me at meetings that had never happened. Marcus had been planning this for months, maybe even before our son died. The good news, Stephen said, is that we can prove most of these are forgeries. The metadata doesn't match up, and some of these supposed meetings happened when you were documented elsewhere. He paused, looking at me over his reading glasses. The bad news is he's already sent this to 3 journalists. My stomach clenched. Who? Michael Torres at the Herald, Sarah Chen at Legal Times, no relation to the judge, I checked, and James Morton at the Daily Wire. He handed me a printout of the email chain. They're all hungry for a follow-up story about the firm's collapse. This would be perfect for them. How long do we have? Morton's planning to run his story tomorrow morning. The others will follow quickly to avoid being scooped. Stephen stood, pacing the room. We need to move fast. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Remember Richard Morrison? The one whose testimony helped us take down Marcus? The client Marcus was blackmailing? What about him? He owes me now. And he has connections at every major paper in the city. I pressed dial, putting the phone on speaker. Richard answered on the second ring. Claire? I was just thinking about you. I need another favor. I explained the situation quickly, watching. Stephen's expression shift from confusion to understanding to appreciation. You want me to kill the stories? Richard asked when I finished. No, I said, catching Stephen's eye. I want you to help us tell the true story first. 2 hours later, I sat across from Rebecca Martinez, Sarah's cousin, and the Herald's top, investigative reporter. Her recorder sat between us, red light blinking steadily. Start from the beginning, she said. Tell me everything. So I did. I told her about the fertility treatments, about the loss of our son, about discovering Marcus's betrayal. I told her about finding the ledger, about working with Stephen to expose the truth legally rather than destroying lives publicly. I showed her the proof of Marcus's forgeries, the real timeline of events, the testimony from others who could verify my story. Why come forward now? She asked finally. I thought about Victoria and her son, about the house I was leaving, about the future I was trying to build from the ruins of my past. Because the truth matters, I said. Not just for me, but for everyone involved. Marcus hurt a lot of people, clients who trusted him, colleagues who believed in him, a system that was supposed to protect the innocent. He needs to face that truth, not hide behind more lies. Rebecca turned off the recorder. This is going to be big, Claire. Are you ready for that? I've been ready since the day I found him celebrating his new son, while ours was being taken to the morgue. After she left, Stephen poured us both a drink. You did well, he said, handing me a glass. Rebecca's story will run tonight online, tomorrow in print. The other papers won't touch Marcus's version after this. I sipped the whiskey, letting it burn away the tension in my throat. He'll try something else. Probably, but we'll be ready. Stephen sat beside me on his leather couch. You know, when you first came to me with the ledger, I thought this was just about revenge. But it's not, is it? It never was. Not really. I stared into my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. It was about justice, about truth, about making sure he couldn't hurt anyone else the way he hurt me. My phone buzzed, a text from Lisa, Sarah's sister. The buyers had signed the final paperwork. The house was sold. I close on a new place next week, I told Stephen. Small condo downtown near the river. No memories there. He nodded approvingly. Fresh start? Something like that. I stood, gathering my things. I'm thinking of starting my own practice, helping people who've been victims of legal fraud, using what I learned from all this to do some good. You'd be good at it, Stephen said. You understand both sides now, the law and the human cost when it's abused. Outside, the sun was setting over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I thought about the day everything had changed, about the hospital corridor where I'd knelt broken and alone. I wasn't that woman anymore. I never would be again. Thank you, I said to Stephen, for believing in me, for helping me fight the right way. He smiled, the expression softening his usually stern face. You did all the hard work. I just provided the legal expertise. As I drove home, to the house that wouldn't be mine much longer, I felt strangely peaceful. Marcus's latest attempt to destroy me had failed, but more importantly, I'd found a way to turn even this attack into something positive, something that might help others. My phone rang through the car's speakers. Judge Chen's name appeared on the display. Mrs. Reynolds, she said when I answered. I thought you should know. Marcus was just admitted to the psychiatric ward at Memorial Hospital. He had some kind of breakdown after learning about the Herald story. I pulled over, processing this news. Will he be okay? Eventually, I expect. But Claire... She hesitated. He's asking to see you. The sunset painted the world in soft colors, reminding me of nursery walls we'd once painted together, of dreams we'd shared, of a future that had died with our son. No, I said finally. Tell him I'm sorry. But no. That chapter of my life is closed. After I hung up, I sat watching the sun sink below the horizon. Tomorrow the Herald story would break. Tomorrow the world would know the truth. Tomorrow I would take another step toward whatever future waited for me. But tonight, I would honor the woman I used to be, the child I'd lost, and the strength I'd found in surviving both. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't in destroying your enemy, it's in refusing to let them destroy you. The Herald's story broke like a thunderstorm, flooding every news outlet and social media channel with its revelations. Rebecca's article was masterful, a careful blend of hard evidence and human drama that left no doubt about who had done what and why. By noon, my phone had over 100 missed calls and twice as many messages. I ignored them all, focusing instead on packing the last boxes in my bedroom. The moving truck would arrive tomorrow, and I wanted to be ready. Needed to be ready. Sarah appeared at my door around 2, holding up a copy of the Herald like a peace offering. You didn't tell me you were going public. I didn't tell anyone. I folded another sweater, trying not to remember the night Marcus had given it to me. It wasn't planned. He forced my hand. She sat on the edge of my stripped bed, scanning the article. Sources close to the investigation suggest that Marcus Reynolds' mental health has deteriorated significantly since his resignation. She looked up at me. Is that true? He's in the psychiatric ward at Memorial. I closed another box, labeling it with precise strokes. Apparently, he had some kind of breakdown when he learned his plan to frame me had failed. Good. Sarah. What? The man destroyed your life, Claire. He deserves whatever happens to him. I sat beside her, the mattress sagging slightly under our combined weight. I used to think that too, that he deserved to suffer like I suffered. But now, I gestured at the half-empty room. I just want to move forward. The doorbell rang before she could respond. Through the window, I saw a sleek black car in my driveway, one I didn't recognize. "I'll get it," Sarah offered, but I shook my head. No, I need to start handling things myself. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with an elegant woman in her 60s, her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon. It took me a moment to recognize her. Eleanor Reynolds, Marcus's mother. "Hello, Claire." Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, cultured, controlled, with just a hint of old money Boston beneath the surface. "May I come in?" I hesitated, then stepped aside. She walked into the foyer, her eyes taking in the boxes and bare walls. "You're moving," she said. Not a question. "Tomorrow." I led her into the kitchen, the only room still relatively intact. "Would you like some tea?" "No, thank you." She set her designer handbag on the counter. "I've just come from seeing Marcus at the hospital." Something tight coiled in my stomach. "How is he?" "Sedated." She met my eyes directly. "The doctors say he's had a complete psychological break. They found him in his apartment, surrounded by pictures of you and," she paused, "and the baby." The air left my lungs in a rush. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need you to understand what you've done to my son." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "What I've done? This vendetta of yours, stop." My voice cut through the air like a blade. "Your son watched me go through 3 miscarriages. He held my hand through countless fertility treatments. He promised me we'd have a family together. And the whole time, he was building that family. With someone else." I took a steadying breath. "The day our son died, he was celebrating the birth of his child with his mistress. So don't you dare come into my home and accuse me of destroying him." Eleanor's perfectly composed face cracked slightly. "I didn't know about that day. There's a lot you don't know." I pulled out Rebecca's article and handed it to her. "Everything in here is true. Every illegal act, every betrayal, every lie. Your son did this to himself." She read in silence, her hands trembling slightly. When she finished, she looked older somehow, more vulnerable. "I raised him better than this," she whispered. "Maybe you did. But this is who he chose to be." She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "He wrote this for you, before they sedated him." She placed it on the counter. "You don't have to read it, but he's still the father of your child." "No," I said quietly. "He's the man whose child died while he was celebrating with his mistress. There's a difference." Eleanor stood, gathering her dignity around her like a shield. "The doctors say he'll need long-term care. Months, maybe years of therapy." She paused at the kitchen doorway. "I know you don't owe him anything. But if you could find it in your heart to forgive him." "I already have." The realization hit me as I said it. I forgave him the moment I decided not to destroy him publicly. The moment I chose justice over revenge. I looked around at the boxes, at the empty spaces where pictures used to hang. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean going back. After she left, I stood staring at the envelope on my counter. Marcus's handwriting on the front, my name in his familiar scrawl. Sarah appeared beside me, silent but supportive. "Are you going to read it?" I picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. Inside would be explanations. Maybe apologies. Probably more manipulation. More lies. "No," I said finally. "Whatever he has to say, it's too late." I struck a match and held the envelope over the sink, watching as the flames consumed his last words to me. The ashes swirled down the drain, taking with them the last physical connection to the man who had both given and taken everything from me. "Help me finish packing?" I asked Sarah. She squeezed my hand. "Always." As we worked, the afternoon sun painting long shadows across the empty rooms, I thought about Eleanor's words about forgiveness. She was wrong. Forgiveness wasn't something I could give Marcus to heal him. It was something I had given myself to heal me. Tomorrow I would move into my new condo. Tomorrow I would start building my new practice. Tomorrow I would take another step toward whatever future awaited me. But today, I would honor this final goodbye. Not just to Marcus, but to the woman I had been when I loved him. She deserved that much, at least. We both did. 1 month after moving into my riverside condo, I stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sunrise paint the water in shades of gold. My new office would open today, a small practice dedicated to helping victims of legal fraud and malpractice. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus's betrayal had led me to find my true purpose. The morning light caught the silver frame on my desk, drawing my eye to the only photograph I'd brought from my old life. An ultrasound picture, grainy and perfect, showing the profile of my son. I'd debated for days whether to display it, whether it would be too painful a reminder. But in the end, I realized that he deserved to be here, in this new beginning. He was, after all, the catalyst for everything that had followed. My phone buzzed with a text from Stephen. "Ready for your first client?" I smiled, typing back, "As ready as I'll ever be." The client was a woman named Maria Torres, who'd lost her family's savings to a corrupt attorney who'd promised to help with her immigration case. When she walked into my office, I saw in her eyes the same mix of pain and determination I'd once seen in my own. "I don't have much money," she said immediately, clutching her folder of documents. "But I need someone who understands what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trusted." "Tell me everything," I said, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Start from the beginning." As she talked, I took notes, asked questions, began forming a strategy. This was what I was meant to do. Use my pain to help others find their way to justice. Not revenge, not destruction, but real, lasting change. The day flew by in a blur of consultations, paperwork, and planning. By evening, I had 3 cases I believed in, and a growing sense that I was exactly where I needed to be. Sarah came by after closing, carrying a bottle of champagne. "To new beginnings," she said, popping the cork. The sound made me flinch, memories of another champagne celebration threatening to surface, but I pushed them away. This was different. This was mine. "I saw Judge Chen today," Sarah mentioned as we sipped from paper cups, the proper glasses, still packed somewhere. "She asked about you." "How is she?" "Good. Victoria and the baby are settled in Chicago. She's planning to visit them next month." Sarah paused. She also mentioned that Marcus is being transferred to a long-term care facility in Vermont. I let this information settle over me, surprised by how little it affected me. "I hope he finds peace there." "You really mean that, don't you?" "I do." I walked to the windows, watching the last light fade from the sky. I spent so much energy hating him, wanting him to suffer like I suffered. But that pain wasn't helping me heal. It wasn't bringing our son back. It wasn't building anything new. Sarah joined me at the window. And now I'm building something that matters. Something that might help other people avoid what I went through. I turned to look at my new office, the clean lines, the fresh paint, the plaque on the door that read, "Claire Reynolds, Legal Advocacy and Ethics." Something that honors my son's memory in a way that revenge never could. Later that night, after Sarah left, I sat at my desk looking at the ultrasound photo. "I miss you," I whispered to the grainy image. "I'll always miss you. But I think you'd be proud of what's happening now, of who I'm becoming." A light breeze came through the slightly open window, carrying the scent of the river and the promise of spring. In a few months, the trees along the riverbank would bloom, new life emerging from winter's grief. I wouldn't be the woman who planted the garden at my old house, or the woman who painted a nursery blue with trembling hands, or the woman who knelt broken in a hospital corridor. I would be someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned that the best revenge isn't in destroying your enemy, but in building something beautiful from the ashes they left behind. My phone buzzed one last time. A text from Maria Torres. Thank you for listening today. For the first time in months, I feel hope. I smiled, touching the ultrasound photo gently before standing to leave. Tomorrow would bring new clients, new challenges, new opportunities to turn pain into purpose. Tomorrow would bring another chance to prove that even the deepest wounds can become wellsprings of compassion. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise over the river, another day of building something meaningful from the ruins of what was lost, another step forward on this path I never wanted, but had somehow learned to walk with grace. And for the first time since that day in the hospital, I found myself looking forward to tomorrow. Not because I had forgotten. I would never forget. Not because I had stopped grieving. Some part of me would always grieve. But because I had finally understood that the best way to honor those we've lost is to live fully, love deeply, and use our pain to help heal others. In the end, that's the truest justice of all. The end. Thanks for watching to the end. What did you think of this story? Let us know in the comments below. We value your opinion. Click the like button if you enjoyed it and be sure to subscribe to receive more captivating stories. Activate the bell so that you're always the first to know when a new video is published. See you next time.